Mongoose Jake here with what will be my mod guide for the Nerf Rukkus ICS 8. When I reviewed it, I did say I was going to at least show the internals and show what mods could be done to this thing to maybe bring it up to a respectable performance, because despite being in the Elite color scheme and even labeled as Elite, it does not actually hit Elite performance, only firing around the mid-60s for its muzzle velocity. And of course you can see Chronograph Test on my Rukkus ICS 8 review, which I'll put in the little card up above. And what it shows was that it had a very poor barrel fit, and the performance was, again, about 5 feet per second underneath the Elite expectation of 70 feet per second. Now, I've already torn this down. I've already been into it a couple times and looked around. But one thing to note, when you do go to take it apart, these two screws do need to be loosened to separate the priming bar on top, but the half of the priming bar on each side of the blaster shell stays attached. Don't try to rip it off. It actually has a flared screw that holds it in place on the inside of the shell. So just remove all your screws, set this half of the shell aside. The clip itself is just laid in there. You don't need to take anything apart to remove it. Just once that half of the shell is off, set that aside. You come into a completely self-contained unit. Now, I've already torn it apart, like I said. So what we'll do is we will, I'll show you here in just a second. When you take it apart, you have 4 screws. Let's take a look here. 4, they're all the same length, so don't worry about where they came out of as far as orienting to put them back in, but keep on a hold of all those. Don't misplace them. As you see, I put them in a magnetic tray. They come out of right here, and I slid that, but there's also 2 that hold this little shell on, here and here. You'll have to make sure you move this little lever to where it can get out of the way so you can get this screw out. And then there's 1 to the top, and that's 4. There are 2 little tabs, again, here and here on top, as well as 1 underneath here, and you will need to spread that apart gently. Don't bend them or break them. And then this unit, which is not actually held down in any way, shape, or form into the shell, this unit will be able to be pulled in half. And the reason why I won't actually be doing the mod, but I'll show you what you need to do for modding, is the fact that this uses a spring that I didn't expect. The spring in this is actually the same spring out of the AccuStrike Alpha Hawk. This is a 7 kilogram Retaliator Spring from NF Strike. I had it ready to put in this. It's not what it takes. And just like the Alpha Hawk, this has a floating plunger tube, and by the floating I mean that it's actually in there on a small spring, so that it can, on the Alpha Hawk it does that because it has a rotating cylinder, a 5-shot cylinder. On here it's so that there's a little bit of back pressure to keep this from shoving forward too hard, and if there was too much forward pressure, the clip would have a hard time indexing. So they put a little spring to keep it pushed back just enough, and all you have to do is lift this up and out, make sure not to lose track of that spring, otherwise it will start to push forward and you might see some you might see your clip knot advance. You pull this out, and again, just like the Alpha Hawk, it has the almost exact same plunger tube. I'm going to have to pull one of my Alpha Hawks apart again and see, because I think this is the same plunger tube. I think that plunger tube there, this 2-piece plunger rod, I think it's the same. Because just like with the Alpha Hawk, you pull your spring down, and then you leverage this out by spreading the plunger rod apart a little bit. You get that out, and then you can remove your spring. Simple as that. Now for comparison, here is the Rukkus spring. Here is a 7 kilogram Retaliator spring. The Rukkus spring is, as you can see, far shorter, but it's also wider. The Retaliator spring can actually fit inside of the Rukkus spring. Now, would that be an issue for width? Not really, until you see that the plunger rod is too big. So, cannot use a Retaliator spring even if I were to cut it down, or even if I jammed it in there and over-compressed it. So you can't use this. You can't use this spring at all. What you'll have to do is, I know for a fact that Orange Mod works when I modded my Alpha Hawk, they had a 6.5 kilogram spring for the Alpha Hawk. If that's still available, that's what I would probably put into this. If not, I might be tempted to go down if there's a 4.5 or 5 kilogram spring. Because when I modded my Alpha Hawk, I ran into this problem. This right here is all you have for plastic on the plunger rod. You have a little tab here, a little tab on the other side, and then just the top portion. It's not the complete top, but it's just part of it. And my Alpha Hawk, its plunger rod actually snapped. These broke off and that bent. And it, of course, failed to prime and failed to fire. I actually cut out of a very thin sheet of some copper I had. I actually had a thin sheet of copper for a brazing project that I was doing. And I cut a thin sheet and I epoxied it on the outside here, as well on the top, as well as on the sides. And I made it actually trimmed to fit exactly to match this. And then when I put my plunger rod back together, when I was to put this together, I actually packed it full of epoxy in here and then put this in. And there's actually a little spot for a screw to go into these pieces, and when you put it back together, you could actually install that. It would take just a coarse thread, very small screw. Don't go oversized or you'll stress the plastic here. But it's going to take an Alpha Hawk spring, because that is the same spring as the Alpha Hawk, or for those of you who've been doing it a little bit longer, the Spectre. So if you happen to have a favorite spring that you use for a Spectre or Alpha Hawk, get that, order it up. I would recommend not going too heavy on the spring weight, or you're probably going to break your plunger rod, just as it took about a month or so to break my Alpha Hawk's plunger rod. And then, of course, then I reinforced it, repaired it, and it's been good ever since. But this is Mongoose Jake with my mod guide. I do believe you're just going to have to focus on getting Alpha Hawk spring, remove the air restrictor while you have it apart, which is pretty simple. Just take this apart, clean up everything on the inside of the plunger tube, cut this out, don't damage your foam, or if you do, replace it, and just cut that out completely, get a good airflow. And while you have the blaster completely apart, go ahead and trim up the back of this. You know, cut these tabs out so that you can get a clean airflow through. If you want to go full on, drill out each of these real cleanly and then press fit some brass in there. And then you'd have a Rukkus that's about as good as it's going to get. Brass up, like I said, brass up the clip, get rid of your air restrictor, put a Alpha Hawk spring on here, find your favorite source, whether it be Worker, NF Strike, Orange Modworks, whatever. While you have it apart, be sure to reinforce this connection here, because this is a weak plunger rod, and then reassemble. And if it's anything like my Alpha Hawk, I was able to get it to hit up to around 100 feet per second, and you may be able to do that with this. That'll be a future project to actually do. When I do it, I'll chronograph it and show it and range test it and whatnot. But for now, I just don't have the parts on hand because it's not the spring I was expecting to use. I was fully expecting that this would be a modified Retaliator or Delta Trooper shell, which would have made use of this. But hey, I'll use this in another project anyway, so no loss. But this is Mongoose Jake with taking a look at the internals of the Rukkus ICS-8 from Nerf, as well as my kind of mod guide without actually getting to do the mod. But hope you enjoyed it anyways, and thanks for watching.